he had a calculator. I said, and he knew what the exchange rate was. I said, how much money is that, Earl? And he was sitting up there and he's like, $57 US. Hey folks, SC Closer. Friends call me Vic. This is another episode of Vic Sea Stories and Tall Tales. I'm going to continue on the Korea theme here. And I'm going to continue on this Pohang Korea thing. But it was me and a buddy of mine. We went over to, just looking around, exploring. We found a music shop, okay? And we went in, and, they make a lot of products there in Korea, and I think they like run off extras and sell them. And I don't know, I think a lot of these companies, the guitar companies, have contracts to make guitars for different name brands like Fender, and they run some extra ones off that maybe aren't licensed, and they sell them themselves, there, and I guess that's how they made a little extra money, because I don't think they were really licensed Fender products, and they had some that were Mark Gibson too, but they didn't seem quite. They seemed a little more different. But we went into the shop and we were looking around, and they had all these, Fender style guitars like Stratocasters and Telecasters and all this stuff, and they had amplifiers, and they just had, it had all kind of acoustic guitars, and they just had all kind of stuff in there, and we were just looking around like kids in a candy shop, and stuff looked pretty cool, and so we were looking around, and I would point at a guitar, and I'd say, how much is that? And the guy that was helping us, that I guess he was the shop owner, he would pull it down and he'd show it to me, and he'd say, this is like something like 160,000 baht or won. Yeah, they were won, I think, in Korea. So like, 160,000 won or 60,000 won, some huge number, and I was like, oh my God, And so I looked over at my buddy. But anyway, I looked over at him. He had a calculator. I said, and he knew what the exchange rate was. I said, how much money is that, Earl? And he was sitting up there and he's like, $57 US. And I'm like, $57? I said, and he said, yeah, $57 US. And I said, I could get a Fender Stratocaster for $57 with a gig bag and everything. They had gig bags back then. This is 1987. You didn't see that much, but they had them over there. So I told the guy, I said, yeah, I'll take that. I said, how much is this amplifier over there? And they had this amplifier over there. It said Guitar Man, and it was called a distortion amp, okay? They misspelled distortion. They said it Distrotion, distortion. I thought that was hilarious. And I played through it. It sounded good. I said, how much is that amp? And he come up with something. I looked over, Earl, how much is that? So that's $42. I said, I'll take one of those. And so, and we bought some cables and we bought some other things, and then Earl picked him out a guitar, and he bought an amplifier. He got him a distortion amp too, and we got these amps and everything, and we paid for them. And the guy was all, real nice to us and everything. And he looked like he was just excited and tickled as anything that he was selling stuff, because we were the only people in the store the whole time we were there. So we go back to the ship, and we get back and we have all this cool stuff, and everybody said, hey, where'd you get that from? Where'd you get that from? So we were telling our buddies about it, and they're like, well, where's this place at? And we're like, well, and we tried to tell them, and they're like, can you show us? Can you take us back there tomorrow? And it's like, yeah. So the next day, we'll take some of our friends with us, and we go back down there. And I come back in the store, and the guy sees us. I said, hey, we brought some friends. And the guy was just ecstatic, And again, there's nobody in the store but us, right? So we brought some more folks in there, and we were just buying stuff, And I brought back some more money from the ship. I didn't bring it all with me the first time out, and I bought I think it was like a little classical guitar, and I bought a few other things while I was there, because it was so cheap. And so everybody just bought a whole bunch of stuff, and everybody was leaving. And so me and my buddy, the original two guys that had come in there before, the shop owner said, "Yeah, can I talk to y'all for a minute and everything?" He said, "Sure, yeah." So the rest of the guys left, and Earl and I stayed, and he was like, "Yeah," he goes, "I want to thank you guys, and the guy could speak English, he says, "I want to thank y'all for bringing me the business, He said, "This is the most sales I've had all year." He said, "I've sold more in 2 days than I normally sell in a year." And I said, "You're kidding." He said, "No." He said, "I would like to introduce you to my wife and everything. And could you stay a while?" And we're like, "Yeah, yeah." So we went to the back of the shop. And there was a little door back there, and we went through it. And his living quarters was behind the shop. So what the deal was is that he had a little storefront, right, where he sold guitars and stuff. And then he lived back there with his wife. And he's a fairly young guy, and he had a nice young wife. And I met her, and they were very, very nice, and they offered us tea. And so we got tea, and we sat down, and they had a television, and they had something on TV. I forgot what it was. Um, I probably didn't even know what it was, to be honest with you. And we talked a little bit, and we drank tea, and they were telling us how much they liked Americans and everything. And they talked a little bit about, how they were happy, that we helped them in the Korean War, and they were just, real thankful, and that we came back and brought our friends, and everything. And it was a unique experience. And I always remember that. And he was a really nice person. Him and his wife both, they were really nice people. And it was just interesting. But he wanted to meet us and talk with us, because he appreciated us so much.